John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. Today, we're reading issue number 108, and just a little catch-up on what's been going on in the last couple issues. We just finished a two-part story arc where John helped the ghost of a veteran from World War II come to terms with his death, and also reacquaint him with his first love from before the war. And the cool thing was this house was being hidden by this ghost, and regular people could not see it in the neighborhood, even so much that the company that owned this housing block had records of the address but could not find it on the street. And that was kind of like a nice two-issue story where John did something good for someone. But unfortunately, issue 108 is kind of back to the normal, where John is getting into some bad trouble, and unfortunately, some people get hurt in the process that maybe deserve it, maybe don't. But first things first with the issue, we got the cover. We see a young female gymnast doing the pommel horse, and she's standing on her arms on top of the handles on this pommel horse. At least I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. I'm not a gymnast by any means, and I don't really follow that sport, so I apologize if I'm wrong. And then we also see on this page, as she is doing her gymnastics in the white space, there is an evil satyr or faun, and I say evil because they have a very menacing look on their face, and they have sharp teeth, and they're smiling evilly. And it looks like there's grapevines growing from out of their horns. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Paul Jenkins with art by Charles Alderd, who you might know as the main artist of The Walking Dead, I think after issues 7 or 8. And I believe he did that whole series after that first chunk, which was a different artist named Terry Moore. So I guess Sean Phillips was on vacation or something, but he did do the cover, which looks pretty sick and matches all the other covers that we've seen from him in this run. And as we turn to the first page, we see a family sitting down for dinner. There's the father, who is kind of fat and balding, the mom, who's got short brown hair and looks kind of frumpy. Then we have a young teenage girl who has long blonde hair. And we see the father and mother are definitely cutting into their food and eating it, but the daughter's just kind of poking at it with her fork. And over these panels, the narration says, "For the Carpenter family, dreams come in varying shapes and sizes. Daddy's dream is as big as it can be, and always the same. It's a dream of his daughter Jenny, or rather, it's a dream of himself, the inspirational genius behind Jennifer's flawless gymnastic performance at the next Olympic Games. Mummy's dream is far less ambitious. It usually involves a gray fuzzy thing that lives in a bottle behind the bathroom mirror. But whatever it is, no one really cares." And we see the dad turn to the daughter and say, "Jenny, stop fidgeting. Do you need to go to the toilet? Go to the toilet, please." So Jenny stands up and obeys him, and just by her body language, it seems like she's kind of depressed and down. Her hair is constantly hanging over her face, and she has hunched shoulders. And as she walks to the restroom, the narration says, "Jenny's dream, however, is the smallest of all. Her dream is whatever Daddy wants it to be." Then we cut to her in the restroom, and she is throwing up in the toilet, and the narration continues. "Jenny sorts through the soiled fragments of her young life's inexperience. In here, she'll purge herself of all those horrible mistakes in the week that was." Then we get some flashes of Jenny on top of a balance beam, and the narration continues. "A misstep on the balance beam at Tuesday's practice. She's been paying for that one all week. But for now, she won't be able to feel the disappointment of her coach, or see her dreams of glory in temporary ruins." And then we see Jenny stick her fingers down her throat, again making herself vomit. Then we get another flash of her on the balance beam, and we see in the crowd her dad is watching. And then we get a zoomed-in panel of his face, and it looks like he's very angry or not impressed by his daughter's performance. And he's yelling from the stands, "Jenny, what are you doing? Pull yourself together, for God's sake." Then we get a panel of Jenny remembering all this, looking up from the toilet, and the narration says, "And best of all, she won't have to listen to the echo of her loving father's firm but fair criticism." Then Jenny stands up from the toilet now that she's finished throwing up, and she begins to remove her clothes except for her underwear, and she stands in front of a full-length mirror, and the narration continues saying, "Much better," thinks Jenny, as the last of her sickness is washed away. But then, of course, the sickness immediately begins all over again. And we see Jenny looking at her reflection in the mirror, and her body is extremely skinny and skeletal looking, but in the mirror she sees a very overweight version of herself. And as she stares at the fat version of her, she says, "Big, big, 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 big." And we also see on this page that the name of the issue is Days of Wine and Roses. Then we turn the page and we cut to John Constantine arriving at what looks like some sort of mansion. And John says to whoever opened the front door, "Morning, Squire. Nice day for an orgy, eh, what?" And the man who answers looks behind John and says, "Yes, Mr. Constantine, isn't it? Do hurry inside, would you? There's a good chap." But John doesn't hurry inside. He lights a cigarette and says, "It's all right, your membership. I'm only here for the beer." Then we see this man walking around the house and showing John all the expensive paintings and stuff in the front area. But we know something's different because, John did mention that there's supposed to be an orgy or something here. And also we see the person that's taking John's jacket is a tall, muscular man who's wearing a leotard and lingerie. And as John walks around, the narration says, "First lie of the day, and it's a good one. Truth is, I'm only here for the blackmail. The legendary Simon Horkhart MP and his legendary fuck parties. I've always wanted to get into one of these. Never hurts to know who's knobbing who these days. Judging by the state of Simon's gaff, though, it's a fair bet that all the beautiful people are simply knobbing the other ones." And I believe the gaff he's referring to is the man in lingerie taking John's coat, who I guess John doesn't think is very attractive. And as John walks away from the coat person, he notices a table that just has a bunch of giant cucumbers on it, and he picks one up and he says, "Christ almighty," because I believe he knows that these vegetables are going to be used for more than cooking. So then we turn the page and we see John being escorted into, I guess, the orgy room where everybody's wearing different kinds of BDS costumes and lingerie and stuff, and there's a mix of men and women. And over these panels, John narrates, "So how did I get invited, you may well ask? Well, it was a simple matter of talking myself up in a few strategic places. Specifically, letting it slip to a few of the gormless twats down at the Harrow Club that I'm now specializing in non-orthogenital fertility rituals. Next thing I know, someone's shoving a gold envelope under my front door. It's the right honorable member inquiring if I might help his next party go off with a bit of a bang. Mind you, I'm beginning to wonder why the dopey bastard needs my help. And John is wondering that because as he gets further into this room, there's more and more crazy weird stuff, like for instance, a man dressed in a goat costume that is eyeing John as he sits in a beanbag. But eventually, John is led out by Simon outside to a courtyard, and there's a big fountain in the middle with what looks like Cupid shooting an arrow. And as they get to a table with drinks, John takes one, and Simon says, "Now then, do you think you can set up here, Mr. Constantine? You see, I'm having the frottage room redecorated." And John, who doesn't really seem to be paying attention to him, says, "Huh? Oh yeah, no problem." And a very excited Simon says, "Splendid! Let the games begin, eh?" Then we turn the page and we cut to earlier that day, because it was nighttime when John got to this guy's house, and now it's just before sunset, and we are at a secondary school, and inside of this building we see Jenny training for her gymnastics, and Jenny's coach, who is a black woman in her 20s, is watching Jenny do all the exercises, and of course Jenny's father is there, and we see Jenny stumble as she jumps off one of these platforms, and her father yells out, "Jenny, pull your gut in! You look like the bloody Michelin Man!" And as her coach bends down to help her up, she whispers in Jenny's ear, "It's okay, kiddo. We finished for tonight. Go ahead and change. I'll have a word with your bloody dad." So Jenny goes to the locker room to change, and then we see the coach walk over to the dad and say, "You're a fucking prick, Jason. Can't you see what that does to her? She's already 30 pounds under her proper weight. She looks terrible, and you're making it worse." But the dad doesn't seem to care about what she's saying, and he says, "Someone needs to push her." And then he stands up and looks down at the coach trying to intimidate her, but it doesn't seem to be working as she stares right back at him and says, "Push her? Towards what? An early grave?" And the dad snaps back, "If she looks fat, she'll lose points." And almost like she can't believe what she just heard, the coach looks down in disbelief and says, "Who's she losing points with, Jason? The judges?" And then she stares back in the father's eyes and says, "Or you?" And the dad looks taken aback by this. And in anger, he reaches out and he grabs one of the straps of the coach's leotard and he says, "Don't you ever say that again, do you hear me?" And the coach is shocked by this and she yells out, "Hey!" But then the dad pulls her close and says in her ear, "You never made it, Laura. I have friends in this town, you know. They talk. You don't want everyone to know why you failed." And it seems that whatever he's threatening is actually something she does not want to get out. So defeated, she says, "Let go of me." And the dad does let her go, and then he smugly says, "Huh, I didn't think so. You just take care of Jenny's technique and leave her mind as someone who cares about her. She's my girl, and don't you ever forget it." And as the father said this last thing, we do see Jenny is actually crying as she hides behind a door listening to this happen. Then we cut to that night after practice, and we see the dad is taking them home, and as he drives, Jenny asks him, Dad, did I do something wrong?" And Jason replies, "It's okay, princess. You did awfully well tonight. Laura and I had to clear the air, you see. Sometimes grown-ups argue. That woman, she's not like you and me, Jen. Not at all like us. She lives in a different world, lovely. You wouldn't believe the company she keeps." And as he says this last thing, we see his car pull into their driveway, which just happens to be across the street from the mansion that John is at. And the mansion, of course, is like on a hill a little bit further away than just across the street, but they can definitely see it from their house. Then we cut to John in that courtyard where he's supposed to be setting up for whatever he's there for. And as he bends down to put his pint of Guinness on the ground, he sees a pair of legs, and as he looks up, we see the pair of legs belongs to the gymnastics coach, Laura. And Laura says to John, "Life sucks." And as John gets an eyeful of her legs, he says, "Not from where I'm standing, love." And she finds this charming, and she says, "Silly, you want to do it?" And as John gives her body a once-over, he says, "Sign me up for later." Then we see the host of this party, Simon, and he walks over to John as Laura walks away, and he is wearing a pink tutu now, and he says to John, "Ah, John, I see you've met Laura. She used to be a champion gymnast, you know." And John replies, "Yeah, well, judging by the state of this place, mate, she'd have to be. Still, anything to liven the proceedings up, eh?" And I think John is just kind of being a dick here because there's a bunch of crazy stuff going on in this party. For instance, as John is saying this, we're seeing a very large man in bondage toss another man across the courtyard in front of an audience of a bunch of other people in skimpy bondage clothes. And everybody looks like they're cheering and having a good time. So I think John was just saying that to mess with Simon, who's wanting this to be the best party ever. And it works because Simon says to John, "Oh dear, do you really think it's a dud?" And then John picks up a plastic bag that he brought with him, and he dumps out a bunch of magical-looking items, and he says, "Don't fret, Symes. We'll get the old nuptial fest going again with this little lot. Oh, and fetch us a pint of Guinness for the ritual, eh?" And as John organizes his magical items, a very anxious Simon says, "I'll see to it. Have you done this particular ritual before, Mr. Constantine?" And John replies, "Course I have, Minister. Loads of times." And then Simon rushes off to get John's Guinness, and as he does that, John's narration says, "I'm assuming he means, have I ever ripped off a bunch of cretins with more money than sense? Actually, it's been a couple of weeks. Hope I'm not getting rusty. Oh well, it's always best to make a good show of it for the toffs." Then we see John turn and walk away from his table, and his narration continues. "As I head off in the direction of the buggery chamber, I can't help chuckling to myself at the scam I'm about to pull. I mean, there's no such thing as a non-ortho genital fertility ritual, for Christ's sakes. It's all a load of old bollocks, isn't it?" But just as John's narration gets done saying that this is all fake, and John is just trying to scam these people using fake magic, we get a close-up of the Cupid fountain, and we see something like vines is growing from its eyes. Then we turn the page, and we cut to Jason, the father of Jenny, and he's staring at the mansion through his window, and we see he's got a bottle in his hand, so he's been drinking. And I guess the secret that he knows about Laura is that she likes to go to these orgy parties at this mansion. So as he stares at this mansion across the road, he says about Laura under his breath, "You fucking bitch." Then we cut to Laura in her room, and she is doing the splits in front of a mirror, and then she stands up as she looks at herself, and she begins grabbing skin on her stomach and pinching it, and she says, "Big, big, 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 big." And as she's doing this, all of a sudden, her father, Jason, walks into the room, and like I said, he's very drunk, and he says to her, "Oh, princess, you look nice." And he's so out of it that he's even drooling a bit. And the second that Jenny hears his voice, she turns around and puts her shirt down and says, "Where's Mom?" And as her father walks towards her in the room, he says, "Your mother's gone out again." And then he reaches her and puts his hand on her shoulder and says, "Never does anything. Not for you. It's not fair. Leaving us all alone like this." And then he turns and plops down on her bed, kind of dragging her with him. And she looks very uncomfortable as she's folded her arms against her stomach and she's brought in her knees so that her legs are very closed. And it looks like she's trying to pull away from him, but his whole arm is now over her shoulder and drooping onto her torso. And he continues saying, "Your mom doesn't care about you, Jenny. Not like I do." And then he pulls her close and says, "I love you, princess, don't I?" Then we turn the page and we cut back to inside the mansion, and John is beginning his magic show. And as the curtain pulls back and reveals him to the crowd of all these people dressed in S&M gear and stuff, he says, "Ha, fucking hell, it's the Bolshoi Ballet." And then to make sure everybody's paying attention, Simon yells out, "Oh my, bloody good show, Constantine. Look, everyone, John's about to begin." And this, of course, makes everybody look at John. And as Constantine begins his magic routine, he starts putting his fingers in the Guinness and flicking it at the people in the crowd. And he's saying a bunch of nonsense that's supposed to be magical words. And over the panels, the narration says, "And so the merriment commences. Not that I'm adding much to the prevailing mood, mind. I begin my secret magical chant in earnest." Then we see John as he's splashing the people with Guinness saying, "Alpha tocopurferol, in calcium pantothenate, ex-deuce riboflavin." And as the Guinness is hitting people, it's kind of putting everybody in a mood to have sex, so people begin to kiss, and then other people begin to fall to the ground like they've been hit by magic. And John's narration continues saying, "Even though, truth be told, I'm actually reciting the ingredients to a packet of muesli." But just as John's narration says this, we see one of the drops of Guinness hits Simon, the host of this party, in the head, and he turns and he begins screaming out in pain. And then as he turns back around, we see his body is completely changed into what looks like a satyr that is made of plants. But of course, he's in the same outfit as Simon was, so it's wearing a pink tutu and leotard. And as it turns around, it looks at John and it runs towards him and says,
"Ah, you are the calling we have heard on the vine."
And John looks very shocked at this because, of course, he was just saying nonsense and did not expect anything magical to happen from his words. So John exclaims, "Christ on a pogo stick, you're bloody kidding me." And the satyr replies,
"No, John Constantine. Did you not ask us here? Or do you deny this revelry was intended for such as we? We are the Mendwa, he and she of wine and flour. We are not yet deaf to your summoning. Indeed, we thank you, though there will be little trust between us. But thanks to your fine song, Constantine, the she of Mendwa, my beloved, now imparts herself to one sister this night, converted."
And what this satyr, who I guess is called the he of Mendwa, is saying is that John somehow, even though he was doing fake magic, accidentally invited these gods or demigods of revelry and mirth to this party. And while the he of Mendwa is saying this, all these vines begin to grow out from the ground and they begin to wrap around all the people attending this party and also around the mansion itself. And when the he of Mendwa was talking about his beloved, the she of Mendwa, taking over someone's body and converting them, he's talking about Laura, the gymnastics coach, being taken over by the she of Mendwa. And we see in one of the panels her fighting these vines, trying to stop them from wrapping around her body. But unfortunately, she does lose, and she gets sucked into a tangle of these vines, and I guess transformed into the she of Mendwa. And as Laura is pulled into this tangle of vines, the he of Mendwa continues saying,
"Green and red of blood wine on the plant. This is why we are here. Our brother Jack Green sends his regards, Constantine. We suspect this might be sarcasm on his part, however."
If you remember, Jack of the Green is the lesser elemental who John uses to cross over into the land of Albion, which is kind of like the fairy tale land that England used to be. And the last time John went there with a bunch of his friends made a mess of things and disobeyed the rules. And Jack was very angry about that, so I guess he hasn't let that go. So this is part of his revenge on John. But if John is worried about any of that, he doesn't show it. Of course, he just plays it cool and he lights a cigarette and says to the he of Mendwa, "Yeah, he's a right cracker, ain't he? Which one are you then?" And the he of Mendwa answers,
"Does it matter, Constantine? That we are here is enough for the present."
And John replies, "Smashing. So where's the missus?" And the he of Mendwa answers,
"She is nearby."
Then we get a panel of the She of Mendois, and she is in silhouette as she skulks around the house of Jenny. Then we cut to the inside of the house, where Jenny is about to be assaulted by her father. He has her pinned to the bed, and he is trying to kiss her, and she's fighting back saying, "Dad, don't!" And he's saying, "It's okay, princess. You don't mind." But then downstairs, there's a loud noise, and we see the front door of the house being kicked off the hinges, and the She of Mendois bursts in, yelling, "Jason Carpenter!" And upon hearing all that racket, Jason, the father, gets off his daughter, and as he runs out of his daughter's room, buckling up his pants, he yells down the stairs, "What bloody hell is that? Laura? Is that you? Laura?" And as he turns to go down the stairs, he comes face to face with the She of Mendois, and she punches him directly in the face, which of course knocks him down because she's very muscular. Then vines shoot out of her hands, and she goes to the ground and begins to strangle him. And as she does this, she says, "Jason, full of the spirit of my grain, be still." And of course, Jenny, hearing all this noise, rushes out of her room, and she sees her dad being strangled by the She of Mendois, and she screams, "Dad, what's going on?" And the She of Mendois turns and sees Jenny, and it's almost like she recognizes her, maybe because she's taken over the body of Laura, Jenny's coach. So as the She of Mendois turns and sees Jenny, it's almost like she's remembering something, and she says, "Jen." But then vines shoot out and wrap around the waist of Jenny, and of course Jenny freaks out and begins to yell. And then the She of Mendois stops what she's doing to the dad, and of course he's still wrapped up in vines and stuff, so he can't really move, but she begins to wrap up Jenny and then creeps over to her, and of course Jenny freaks out and yells, "Oh my god, oh my god!" But the She of Mendois says to her, "Shut up! Let me!" And then the She of Mendois gets really close to Jenny and kisses her on the lips. And Jenny looks very surprised and confused by this. And it seems that the She of Mendois, by kissing Jenny, has possessed her and has taken control of her body now. Because we see Jenny get on top of her father, and she has red eyes, and vines are growing out of them. And the dad looks up at Jenny and says, "Jenny? Princess?" But now Jenny sounds like the She of Mendois, and she says to her dad, "It's okay, Dad. You don't mind." Which of course is a callback to what he was saying to Jenny as he was sexually assaulting her. Then we turn the page and we cut back to John and the He of Mendois. And John is being very brash with his deity. He's actually poking his finger into the shoulder of the He of Mendois as he says, "For fuck's sake, look, do us a favor and piss off, eh? You don't belong here and you know it." And the He of Mendois replies,
"We will be where we choose."
And then he proceeds to vomit wine all over John, specifically right into his face, putting out John's cigarette and taking away all of John's bravado. And as John sputters from the grape juice, he says, "Oh, shit. All right then. Why here? Why now?" And with a very sinister smile on his face, the He of Mendois answers, saying,
"We are coming back, Constantine. All of us."
And as the He of Mendois says this, in the background of the page, we see the silhouette of a hand wrapped in vines, holding a serrated knife, and it looks like it is stabbing frantically up and down because drops of silhouetted blood are flying all over the page in the background. But that seems to be going on somewhere else, because we don't see anyone with a knife in this room with John and the He of Mendois. And the He of Mendois' eyes begin to glow red, and red energy begins shooting out of them. And then as we turn the page, he is fully engulfed in this red light, and as John shields his eyes from this light, John asks, "What do you mean? You and the ball and chain, or someone else?" And the He of Mendois answers,
"In time you will know. For now, it is enough that you know we exist. When we were here in ages gone, Constantine, we commanded respect. Now, there is respect for nothing, no one, and that is why we must return."
But even as the He of Mendois says return, we can see his body beginning to transform back into Simon, the host of this orgy party. And as the full transformation back happens, all of the vines that the He and She of Mendois had grown in the house and around the people all disappear as well. But the only person except John who's not passed out is Simon, the host of the party, and he's holding his head like he just woke up from a dream, and he says, oh my. And then he looks around at all the people passed out on the ground, and he says, "That was bloody wonderful, Mr. Constantine. Bloody wonderful." Because I guess if everybody's passed out on the ground, that means it was a crazy awesome party. But of course, John knows what really happened. So as he rubs the back of his head, trying to pretend like everything's fine, he says, yeah. So, did you feel the earth move? Then we cut back to Jenny's house, and we see now where the panel of the knife flailing back and forth was coming from, because we see that same knife sticking out of the chest of Jenny's father, and he's totally mutilated on the ground. His chest is completely cut open. All of his organs are missing in his torso, and his face is unrecognizable, and he's missing his right arm. We also see Laura, Jenny's coach, on the ground dead, and Jenny has crawled all the way back to the toilet, and she is forcing herself to vomit, possibly pieces that she's eaten of her father. And over these gruesome panels, the narration says, "The moment has now subsided, of course. The combatants return to their corners, and hardly the worse for wear, mostly. For some, however, the time for dreams is over. Jenny returns to the comfort of ritual, trying to rid herself of the fullness of wine and roses. She mustn't look fat for Daddy. He needs to live out his dream. Just as soon as he pulls himself together." We see next to the toilet where she is vomiting, there are pieces of her father, like his right arm and his eyeball, and maybe even his ear, that are on the tile floor surrounding her. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, at gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.